And Ristic, thank you for joining me today on Acquiring Minds. Really looking forward to this.
Well, it's great to be here, Will. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. It's been a great learning resource for me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you are the new owner of Agency Employment Services, which provides HR services, staffing, compliance, PEO. We'll get into more of what AES does later. But you bought this business at 60 years young after a decades long career as a managing partner of an illustrious Canadian law firm that you helped build. So I want to start with the obvious question, which I'm sure you got from all your friends and family and colleagues. Why, and are you buying a business, or did you buy a business instead of anything else, like riding off into the sunset of an early retirement that you really seem to have earned?
Well, it is a great question, Will, and one that, as you say, everyone has asked me. So I guess I was not ready to retire. I mean, I feel like I love what I do. I work really hard. I'm not saying I'll never retire, but I do feel like, I love the challenge of work, and I wanted to keep growing, and I wanted to make a change for myself. So I had, as you said, I had been actually at Stikeman Elliott, my law firm, for my entire career, right out of law school. And, the last 20 years in this co-managing partner role in the Toronto office. Um, but I had done a bunch of different things in the firm. I started out as a practicing lawyer, as a corporate M&A lawyer. Then I moved into my first foray into management was sort of as a in the talent recruitment space, because we were really trying to revamp and upgrade what we were doing in recruitment to grow the firm. And then that kind of naturally led to the co-managing partner role. And I loved that job. I loved what I was doing. I would say the part I really loved was the growth journey. I feel like I really excel in that stage of guiding an organization through growth. And when I start, so it is, of course, I'm biased, it is a fantastic leading Canadian law firm. When I joined it, it was in Toronto, which is my city. It was a relative newcomer to the Toronto market and pretty small. So, when I joined, there were 45 lawyers. They are now 250-ish, and lots of growth. But I would say for the past 5 years or maybe more, my management role was not so much about growth. I mean, the firm is still growing, still doing really well, but I was doing more consolidating what we have, building on existing initiatives, but not that really ambitious growth phase that I enjoyed. So I felt, as when I was in my 50s, that I still had a lot of runway left. I loved growing something. I didn't have the idea of what that was going to be, but I started to think about what would I do for my next phase.
Okay, great. So you wanted to grow something, you didn't know exactly what, but you thought business or not necessarily. It could have been. I mean, there's any number of things out there to grow. So a nonprofit, I don't know, a school. I mean, all sorts of things. So tell us how that itch to grow something. How you went from there to much more specifically buying a business.
Yeah. So it's a good point, and I did think about, when there's public service, like government.
Right, exactly.
For me, I felt like, okay, business. I do know the business world in particular. I'll talk about this in a minute, but the kind of service business, I felt a lot of comfort with. So I thought, okay, how I'm really good. I wanted a nice balance of new learning, new growth, but also where I feel like I could really have an impact and add a lot of value. And so I was thinking something in the in the business world. I did start out thinking, maybe I would start my own business, something advisory, consulting, where I would start small and grow up from scratch. So I kind of did a lot of thinking around that. When I sort of told my network and in particularly my partners at the law firm, which I did about a year ahead of when I was planning to finish up, lots of people came to me with ideas of kind of other larger organizations where you could do something. You get calls from headhunters, although they do tend to pigeonhole you into what you've already done. But so there was a range of things that I was thinking about. But I think what kind of crystallized my thinking around actually buying a small business, I think there were three things. The first is one of this sort of early in 2021, one of my now former partners at the law firm, Mario Negro, is a very well connected, very established practice in private equity, mid-market, lower mid-market. He's got the full spectrum. He was doing work with some search funds, and after the partners meeting where I announced to my partners kind of what my plan was and the whole succession plan and so on, he called me right after that, and he had lots of ideas for me, but he said, like, Anne, you should buy your own business. You would be great at it. Here's kind of, what you should do. And I kind of poo-pooed it at first, not to him, but in my own mind, because I felt like, it's risky. Could I afford it? And would I be putting all my retirement savings at risk? All of that. I just felt like, that would be something that a really gutsy person would do.
Not a former lawyer.
not a risk averse former lawyer.
Yeah. Did you know the model of that 10 or 20% down and then paying for the loan that you used to acquire the business out of the profits of the business? Were you yet familiar with that?
Well, not in this context. I mean, I was from being in my old life and in the law firm, lots of that's the private equity or acquisition model, but I didn't really apply it to my own to my own situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I did, it was in the back of my mind. And so then the second thing that happened was that Amazon recommended Walter Deibel's book to me out of the blue. And it said, you might enjoy. And I listened to it actually, because I and then I thought it was so great that I bought it. And again, like my conversation with Mario, it kind of demystified it. I felt like, well, I could do this maybe. So, sorry, we had a couple of conversations because he kept coming back to me saying, Anne, have you thought about this idea? And he sent me some, different opportunities. And but the big thing he did for me was
he was sending you leads. And did you realize how precious those were at the time?
I know. I feel, you know what? I feel so lucky because listening to other people in your podcast talk, and I kind of think the search part is really hard. And I had I think maybe one thing though, possibly about being an older person and having a big professional network that you've worked with over the years, is that there might be more of those kinds of leads that I might get than I would have if I had been a 35-year-old saying, oh, I think this is something that I could do. I mean, I do think I had to establish my bona fides in a different way that you alluded to earlier. Like, no, I'm not. I am serious about doing this and I want to work hard on it. I'm not just looking for a little, sideline project. So I did have to do, but I feel like I did have, through my long years at the law firm and in the business community here in Toronto, have some different connections
so people your competence spoke for itself or preceded you, but people were a little bit suspicious of your actual motivation. Can somebody of your station really want to do this? And you had to convince them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so Mario, well, I just have to point out, we all have the anecdote where we were having a conversation with somebody and then the internet starts advertising that thing to us.
I
So,
know.
and usually it's just totally creepy and not life changing. But in your case, I guess it still was creepy, but it was positive and life changing that, Lo, after this conversation with Mario Walker's book, pops right up. Unbelievable.
Well,
Alexa's listening to us all.
it may be, or it might have been that I mean, I do think I was looking for, because I'm a big reader, that's how I learn a lot. And I think I might have looked at some books on business valuation and,
Ah, okay.
that kind of thing. So
Sure.
then, and, I had earlier, like when I was thinking about starting I read the Lean Startup and I ordered that on Amazon. So maybe they were putting all those things together and saying she would like buy then build. But
Mm.
that was a bit of an epiphany. Like I felt like this is this is doable.
Well,
Um,
that epiphany, light bulb moment, whatever cliche is just used here time and time again because we all seem to go through it. No one realizes how it's possible, and then they either read Buy Then Build or hear about it some other way, and it's like, wow, this is possible. I mean, when I got so excited when my light bulb moment happened, that I started a whole podcast around it.
right,
So I get
right.
it. Go
That's it.
go ahead.
That's good. That's good. Well, so the third thing, and probably the key, the most important thing, and the biggest stroke of luck that you'll say, okay, that was really, really lucky, is that I met Jeremy Yu, who is my search partner and co-investor in in AES. And Jeremy, so again, connected to Mario, Jeremy is so sorry, before all of
Yeah.
this, I did not, I mean, I hadn't read the Stanford model. I wasn't all the stuff that you guys talk on your podcast, like I was not thinking of myself as a searcher. I mean, a
Hmm.
broader searcher after new opportunities, but I didn't think of myself as this thing.
Hmm.
And um but Jeremy is in the bullseye of that, search model. And he has a search fund who's out of Vancouver, Succession Capital, and he had been a self-funded searcher for I think a couple of years and had really developed a great network, done all the search, all the really hard parts. He was well down the road to acquiring a different company, which he has now acquired and he's running. His lawyer was my partner,
Was
Mario.
Mario? Hmm.
Yes, and this opportunity to put in an LOI for AES came to Jeremy's attention through his professional search network. And he was like, "Oh, I'd love to do this," be talking to Mario, but I've got my hands full. And Mario was like, "Well, you should you should meet my partner, Anne." And so I think Jeremy was a little bit of what you said, like, what, does she really want to do this? But we met virtually, as
Mm.
everything happens now, and we really hit it off. Like we hit it off personally. He's a great guy, but also professionally. Like I feel like we have really complementary skill sets, and we kind of thought about how we would share this process from here, with him kind of having done all the heavy lifting in terms of the search and the kind of the traditional search stuff, and me kind of taking the lead on the kind of due diligence, the acquisition piece, and then um, operating the business. But again, for me, so lucky, because Jeremy was like a few months ahead of me in the process with this other business, and plus he was very well versed in all this stuff. So I was, I was like, well, what does your like? Tell me about what's your financial model look like, or how do you do like your commercial due diligence memo? What's in it?
Hmm.
And he shared that with me, so that, and he gave me lots of feedback, like, no, that is not, like, we don't never talk about, like, that's not a search fund thing, but here, this, you want to talk more about this. And so that was super helpful for
So,
me too.
so let me understand. So, Jeremy was doing a self-funded search. He had investors. And
Yes.
he'd been at it for a couple of years. He was pretty experienced. Had been earning his stripes, but still hadn't yet bought a business. But he was down the road on now buying a business when AES came across his desk. He really
Yes.
liked it, but he was already down the road on this other business. So he, through Mario, gives it to you, and so it's just so he proceeds with buying that other business, but he also gets involved in your acquisition in deal, as it sounds like he's kind of advising you, but also I assume he takes an equity piece. So now he's also an equity owner. But you also have equity. You're also an
Yes.
equity owner. Yeah.
Yes.
So you're
Yeah.
co-equity owners. And I assume there's also third-party investors, maybe Jeremy's own investors, who are also in the AES acquisition deal. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that a guy doing a search, Jeremy doing a search, would buy his own business, but also then become basically an investor, an advisor in another searcher before he's even done his first deal. So now, he's a searcher and successful acquirer and an advisor and investor in your deal. So,
Well, it probably seems, it maybe seems different to you. To me, I feel like that's like on a smaller scale. Maybe
mhm,
that's kind of like the private equity model. Like you have a fund and you have investors and you buy one business and you keep your eyes open for other businesses and you
mhm,
kind of develop a portfolio of companies. And kind of when I thought, I just because I know that model, I always, when I kind of learned about the search model, I felt like, okay, that is that same model, except it's smaller and you're only buying one business. I feel like Jeremy is, his model was to buy more than one business
yeah, that's a
opportunistically,
great
but
point.
it's not. It does seem kind of like it maybe his own growth strategy.
And talk to me a little bit about you, if you whatever you can share about like your financial picture or financially what you envisioned, like of your own money or investors and size of business and all that stuff. Because I assume somebody who's been a successful managing partner at a law firm probably has a little bit more in her savings account than people who are just fresh out of an MBA program or doing this mid career. So just paint a picture for me.
So I was, so again, I'll come back to kind of my first discussion or second discussion with Mario, uh, in terms of businesses. My thought was a business of 1 to 2 million, 1 to 3 million, maybe in EBITDA would be kind of the target range, and kind of how he kind of talked me through how something like that would work. So like these are just broad brush numbers. These aren't our real numbers, but just to give you a flavor. So like if you said 1 million in EBITDA, Mario's like, so say your multiple is like 3 to 5, so let's call that 4. So your purchase price is 4 million. In Canada, we don't have the SBA loans, but he was saying that like to get a bank loan, given all the right um, pieces in place, you could get a bank loan for kind of 2 to 3 times EBITDA. So say you get 2.5 from the bank, that
Hmm.
leaves you with 1.5 million if your purchase price was 4 million that you need to raise otherwise. From
Hmm.
You might get a vendor take back for up to half of that, so say that's 500, so you're raising a
A vendor
million.
take back meaning a seller note, seller financing.
A seller note, yes, yes,
Hmm.
yes.
Go ahead.
um, and so kind of a million, if my mental math is right, like a million in equity that, you know this is Mario talking to me, that you would put in, or you would like to 10 people in your world who know you and know what you can do, giving you 100,000, like that would be a way that you could do it. And
Yeah.
I felt like, and or all or any portion of that, you friends and family or whatever, you yourself, or however you want to do it. So that's how I felt like that again, that seemed doable to me. Like, and I hadn't
Hmm.
thought before. I was like, would I even be able to get a bank loan, or, how does, where does who are the, where do you find investors? But then when I started bringing it into my own backyard, I thought I could, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So that was kind of the ballpark that I was thinking of in terms of numbers. And, Jeremy's, uh, when I guess when he and Mario were talking about the AES opportunity, Mario kind of thought, well, that's in that ballpark that Ann and I were talking about too. So that's
So he thought
how
of you,
that
and
was my analysis. Yeah.
so that's another raising money from friends and family or colleagues or professional network is another advantage that somebody who's more established like you has over a 25 or 35 or 40-year-old who don't have as much credibility and as wide a professional network. Did you anticipate that you would that call it $1 million in equity? Did you anticipate that you would raise all of that or a piece of that, or I mean, did you work with investors? I mean, we know that you did, but did you plan on doing
So
it?
so well so my again, I'm going to say before Jeremy and post before Jeremy, I was like, I had my, I did have a plan for reaching out to my network, and some of them had
Hmm.
reached out to me, or when I was talking about doing this, they were like, well, let me know, because, I'm interested.
Hmm.
Um, here's something that I think is, would be of interest to your, yeah, to your listeners, that really I didn't need to do that, because Jeremy had, and he is a younger person than me, not that that's hard, but kind of an early career person. He has a great network within the search and small business community, and he had, through his search, built up a lot of credibility with different investors, and so he raised most of it, actually. Like,
Hmm.
I did had to have a couple of, um, of my connections, but I did not have to do the heavy lifting there. But I mention it only because it before I met Jeremy, it did give me confidence that I would be able to do that. Just kind of thinking through my own professional,
Yeah,
network of people just that I had worked with over the years.
yeah, great. And for let's just revisit really quickly the bank loan piece, because we are so spoiled in the U.S. with the SBA. So what does it roughly look like in Canada? You said, so like if it's a 4x business, 2.5x might come from you might be able to get a bank loan for that. So what is 2.5 over 4? That's what, 60%. Is that the thinking that you get
I mean,
60%
the
from the
way
bank roughly?
they have different thresholds, of course, but I feel like I was looking at it, or thinking about it from two perspectives. One is, you know debt to EBITDA ratio.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of that's, could 3 would be good. It's, maybe under, a bit under 3 is, again, it depends on their, as their credit analysis of the business, and so on, what they would give you there. So that was kind of the 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 statistic that I had in my mind there.
And are banks familiar with the search phenomenon in Canada, or is there like a go-to bank or two that where they do all the searcher business sort of thing?
I think, I think more the latter than the former. Like anything, it's probably maybe even less the bank than like everything, than the human being at the bank. And again, I keep saying this. Here's where I was very lucky with both Mario and Jeremy, that they had, like, they knew who they were
Hmm.
able to refer me to the human being at these two banks. And same thing with my quality of earnings report. I was like, who would do this for me?
Hmm.
Um, they had, like, here are some people that kind of know this space. They know and that part was really, really good.
Okay, AES. So tell us about AES. Tell us what you can about the size, both in terms of employees, but also whatever financials you can share. So start there, and then tell us what you liked about, and Jeremy. I mean, Jeremy liked it too. What you both saw in this business.
So it's just in terms of size, just to give you a flavor. So 15 employees, and
15.
15, 1 5, and three offices in, sort of smaller city centers just west of Toronto. So commuting, I'm in Toronto. Two of the three are commuting distance for me. I'm not, I used to ride my bike to work and now I'm doing lots of highway driving. So, but that is giving me lots of opportunity to listen to your podcast. Well,
Right.
it's
More
like the
traffic.
it's the perfect length. Um, and so we you mentioned this at the outset, but we're sort of in HR um, services, PEO services, staffing, outsourcing business. So our clients are, it's a real mix, but our clients are, um, some are sort of small and mid-sized businesses, local businesses in the Toronto area or west of Toronto that may don't have a the resources to have a full-time HR person or the employment expertise and so on. So for many of these clients, they kind of outsource the employment relationship to us. So we are the employer of record. We do the payroll, the government remittances, the stuff that all sounds very boring to people who aren't lawyers, provide benefits and benefits administration. So the kind of the very baseline HR, you know, uh, uh,
Function.
services that a
Hmm.
small business might not have or be able to have someone full time to do. As part of that, for many of these clients, we also do temporary staffing. So, and it's really interesting. The temporary staffing market is, as I'm learning, there's kind of general labor and kind of, Ontario there's lots of manufacturing and auto, food processing, that kind of thing in this region. There's also a whole sort of IT knowledge worker workforce around, both around Toronto and the University of Waterloo, which is where BlackBerry started, and it's a great so the Kitchener Waterloo area, and Google's there. Like there's a bunch of knowledge workers there, and so we have clients that use temporary staffing for general labor, but also who are working with, what I think of as gig economy workers, IT service provide who are working, as contractors or so that's kind of a, a supplement to the broader service offering, but something that we do a lot of.
And as I recall from our pre-call, actually the business started in staffing and temp staffing,
Yes,
and
yes,
the HR services and PEO services have actually been a later addition to that, and that's where you see a lot of the growth and where kind of I think where you'll really focus and position the
yeah.
business. But that's actually a newer piece of the business. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of the company started doing temporary staffing, and then as part of that, the company would employ the temporary staff, and so then that seemed like a natural addition. I would say the other client segment that I feel like there's lots of opportunity for growth in is um, not local businesses, but cross-border, particularly U.S. businesses that have a presence in Canada, but not a maybe Canadian legal entity or not like enough of a presence that they have, a full-time HR staff, but they need to manage their Canadian workforce. And so some of our clients have found us through that um, uh, have come in through that door that
Mm-hmm.
they need some help with their contracting or payrolling or whatever. Um, So not small businesses, large established businesses where we're working with the, is it the HR person or the CFO kind of offshore to make sure that things are set up properly in Canada.
And you said, I mean, you're obviously learning the industry. There's you're involved in that now. When you were evaluating the opportunity of AES, did you how deeply did you research the industry? So that there's a spectrum. Often people who come into search, who acquisition entrepreneurs who come from private equity backgrounds, for example, they're so well. They're so experienced in doing real hardcore industry research, growth prospects. I mean, that's obvious, but much more nuanced than that. And then probably more people who are not as sophisticated as that. I certainly put myself in that bucket, who want to know, it feels like, the world is becoming more mobile, therefore, X. So very loose kind of sense of where why an industry might be growing or not. Where do you fall on that spectrum? And how much analysis did you do of what you thought the kind of macro prospects were for this industry that AES plays in?
So that's a great question. So, and I would say I'm both of those people.
Oh,
So I think my lawyerly side is you need to do a lot of research and you need to have a really, really good memo, written materials, analysis, numbers, but not just numbers, um, uh, to give you confidence to move ahead. Um, but I would say I'm, more, I, that was to test my hypothesis that this would be a good business. And if I think about, you know, how I actually lean, it was, uh, I'm probably more like, this seems, I have a good, sorry, this sounds bad. I have a good feeling about this
yeah,
business.
yeah.
Like there's lots of opera just based on what I see and my own judgment and kind of what I've experienced in my, world of dealing with people and hiring and legal employment issues. Like, I think there are lots of opportunities. So I probably came to it kind of thinking, I'm interested in this business for this reason. And then I'm going to do the due diligence and the analysis and produce a big, huge, long memo with all kinds of detail in it to make myself comfortable as well as my investors comfortable that I'm not just doing this on a whim.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
Well,
but the kind of that when you but when you say like people coming from private equity and that, I don't come from there, so I have no idea if what I did was kind of, I do have a friend who was, read some of my stuff and he was like, this is very good. Like, and my husband, how did you learn to do it? Did you do all these charts? I was like, yes, I did them myself. So that, uh, so I did have a little bit of a but I mean, I would not say in any by any stretch was I, would I hold myself out as somebody who would have done the analysis
well, well, you shared with me where you saw potential for growth in this business on our pre-call, and I don't know if this comes from your deep, sophisticated analysis side or your gut side or both. So elaborate on those if you would.
So um, kind of number one was kind of the sort of baseline human being business that people are in. Every business needs, particularly now, needs help and focus on attracting talent, retaining talent. Just that never goes away, and so to me that piece is only growing. So that was number one. Number two is the PEO service offering. That's not well known in Canada as it is in the US. In the US, there are lots of PEO service providers, and it's an industry, and people are familiar with it. In Canada, certainly those services get outsourced to different pockets of service providers, but there's less. I won't say there's not, but there's less of the kind of PEO as an industry. So kind of we really felt like there's an opportunity to grow there.
Hmm.
Looking at the U.S. experience, which we in Canada so often do. Oh, they did that. We should be able to copy
Hmm.
them. And then the third piece for me was kind of thinking about, I talked about the fact that the HR services that we offer are quite, baseline employer compliance legally focused, but I do have lots of experience and uh, insights, I would say, into kind of maybe moving up the food chain in terms of other HR service offerings that an HR person would need, or a company that doesn't have an HR person but needs to deal with a difficult employee issue would need. And I feel like we're really well positioned. We are providing some of those services already, but kind of just kind of as an adjunct to kind of the other services that we're doing. And I think that we could potentially market ourselves with more premium level HR services. So those are three. Again, I'm learning, and it's kind of we're testing all the hypotheses, and I've been meeting with clients and the team, and kind of getting it's still early days, so getting a sense. But those were probably the three topics that where we kind of thought that there are some really good growth opportunities.
Well, durability, is the first box you need to check, and so you have that with people business. So that's great. And then if you can layer growth potential on top of durability, you got nothing but upside. we hope.
Yes,
We
yes.
hope.
Let's hope. Let's hope. That's right.
you
That's
you
right.
uh, you met the folks at AES, and that was a big part of you getting comfortable with the acquisition. Talk to us about that.
So yeah, that's a great point, Will, because during the time when my colleague Mario was sending me sims for different companies, I just felt like I was in this chicken and egg thing, because I would read the sim and it was always very persuasive, and it was super helpful, because I looked at numbers and kind of, okay, these are the kinds of things that people are looking at, and but I felt like, okay, but it's going to so much depend on, would I this team that's described in this, would I feel like I could work with this team, and would they like to work with me? And
Yeah.
I feel like that is just impossible to determine from the page, but yet you can't beat them before do the reach out or the letter of intent, or and whatever. But I met Jeremy, obviously met the sellers during the letter of intent process. I met them shortly after that, and I would say I got, again, got a great feeling from them. They were, very practical business people. They were open about the all the topics that you would want them to be open about. They were very, one of the things that really appealed to me was they were I think one of the reasons they chose our offer was they felt like they wanted to keep the team intact and not have, they felt like we wanted to grow and we would do that. So I felt like that had a good, augured well for the culture and the team environment. And then early on in our due diligence process, we did a site visit, and there are four managers. So there were two owners and then four managers. One thing I think the owners did an excellent job on, that I gather doesn't always happen, is that they had brought the the managers into the loop on, not the rest of the team, but the managers, that they were um, uh, planning to to do this. And so we met all four of them, and they took us, that was super useful. Like each of them in separate meetings took us through kind of what they do, and that gave me, I felt like, okay, I'm in my comfort zone here, talking about all these processes and how this works and so on. So I felt like these are good people, and it also gave them the chance to ask us, like, we said, like, so we've been talking to you, like, kind of, do you have questions for us? And of course, they all were like, well, what's your plan for the business?
Yeah.
And I think when we were able to say we want to grow and we really want to build and we're interested in your ideas, I felt like that gave me, their eyes seemed to sparkle. I mean, you never know if they're just being polite, but they seemed to, all of them, to find it that a good, answer.
Hmm.
And so those are all intangibles, Will. And as I would be the first to say, you can always be wrong and you can't trust your instincts and gut too much on these things. But at the same time, to me, is like so important that you have to have that. You need to verify, you need to do a bunch of other stuff, but that to me was a really important piece.
You had mentioned that one of the things that made your offer competitive, you thought, was that you were eager to grow the business and therefore keep on everybody, and add to the team presumably over time. Were you competing with other other offers on the business? Do you
I
know?
think so. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And I don't think that you gave us the any financials about the business. Could you share? Is there anything you could share there?
Well, so I mentioned that kind of my target was kind of one to two in EBITDA, and so we're in that range, like probably say lower end of that range,
Okay.
but that would be kind of the ballpark for us.
Okay, that's great. That's just for the self-funded searcher, for the kind of non-traditional search fund searcher. That's just above the sweet spot, but in a good way. Like just being north of a million,
Yeah.
just north of a million, or wherever that is. You had said something to me going back to your motivation. I should have got this in earlier, but I want to make sure I do get it in. When RBG passed away, there was
Yes.
you looked at her career and said to yourself, what?
Well, that was kind of um we were talking about being an older person
Hmm.
in this, and why are you not kind of just moving on to retirement or slowing down in your nice office that you already have? To me, I felt, I had been thinking, as I said, that I wanted to keep working and, make an impact. But it was a real catalyst for me when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and I remember, there were all the profiles of her,
Hmm.
and I realized that when she went to the U.S. Supreme Court, she was, I don't know, a couple of years older than I was at that time. And I'm certainly not comparing anything I'm doing to what she did on the U.S. Supreme Court. But I felt like that is so amazing, because everything that we know, or everything I know about, she had a great career, of course, before she went to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the impact that she has, and everything that we know about her, and the career um, impact that she had, is all post 60. And I felt like that is something that I want. I don't want to, I feel like we should not have this attitude that, okay, well, once you're past 60, you're slowing down and you're winding up. Like, you can do that, but you don't necessarily need to feel like I'm not relevant anymore, that I don't have something to contribute. And so I did take inspiration. I mean, I admire her so
Yeah.
much, but I did take inspiration from what she did at my age, and felt like, well, I could do that too.
Yeah.
Not go to the Supreme Court, but do something
Right,
different.
right. But the peak of your career is still well ahead of you. Really,
Right.
I love that observation and that message. We're wrapping up here, Anne, but a couple things I wanted to get in no particular order. We talked a little bit about, I mentioned Americans. We have the SBA, common feature of so many of my guests, search. In Canada, you don't. Is there anything else that you kind of would want to tell, or any tips you could share for the Canadians listening? Anything Canada specific, aside from the loan stuff, or not?
Um, well, I'm not sure this would be an interesting insight to anyone other than a lawyer, but our model is much more share purchase as opposed to asset purchase, which is as you know, more liability and trickier for the purchaser. So that is something that you have to be aware of. You know, of course, again, I'm sounding lawyerly, different regulatory environment in terms of, but as I think many of your guests have said, you just need good advisors, good lawyer, good accounting firm to help you. But I would say there are nuances uh, in how it works, but I would say the overall model seems very similar, and I think that's one of the reasons that our U.S. investors, most of our investors are, we have a couple in Canada, but most are in the U.S., and they seemed very comfortable with the structure and the economics and models. So I think it's quite similar.
Great. Eh,
But
Go ahead.
lots of opportunity in Canada. Like I do think that there's a lot of businesses in the Canadian market that we see lots of interest from private equity firms and acquirers, not just in the U.S., but a lot of our business is cross border, probably far more than for you in the U.S. So it is a great market for your searches to consider, I think.
Well, and kind of the point you made earlier about how PEO is really established here and less so in Canada, and there's at times a pattern of some big thing taking off in the U.S. and then Canadians looking down and seeing it and bringing it to Canada. I wonder if search is if there's a similar pattern there where capital S search isn't quite as known yet in Canada, so maybe it's still, maybe it's less competitive. Maybe it's an even more exciting frontier for a would-be Canadian searcher than an American searcher. Do you think?
I think for sure it's less advanced, and there are fewer people doing it in the Canadian market than the U.S. market. I think that is right.
And you had mentioned the American investors. I want to make sure that we mention Juan, who actually introduced us, Juan Ruiz at HBS. What can you tell folks about his investment group?
So Juan has an investment group of, I believe it's all Harvard business students, but I think that there are some branches of the similar funds in different business schools called Community. So I'll put, you need to kind of spell it out to know it, and I always feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong. But essentially, a group of student investors who want to invest in search funds. So I was, and Jeremy, continuing theme, Juan was in Jeremy's network, and when I met Juan and Doug, his colleague, I was super excited. I felt like I love the idea that students, again, this, and that was kind of newer to me, that students are so interested in this area. And then I think, they were going through our materials with a fine tooth comb, and they had quite, they were all over the model. And so I feel like they had lots of questions for me, trust me. And I felt like that was a really good learning experience for both of us. So I think it's just, we were so excited that they invested in us, and I think it's a really good thing for students to get involved in if they're interested.
Community, like community, but commune like ETA. for the listeners out there.
Yes.
We'll have that in the show notes. But yeah,
But
Juan.
the T is capital, or the E. It's like there's a different. Anyway, you'll have it in your.
And then Jeremy sounds like quite a guy, so maybe I'll have to have him on to hear about his acquisition in Did he buy
You
was it in
should.
Vancouver, the business that he bought?
No, it was not in Vancouver. He was based in Vancouver, which and but his business is in Manitoba,
Oh,
Portage la
ah,
Prairie in Manitoba, which is just north of Minnesota, I
yeah,
believe. Although do not quote me on my U.S. geography. So it's a bit of a different urban center, but I think he's really enjoying it.
great,
So.
great. Well, and anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure folks hear, or are we?
Well, the only thing that we talked a little bit about at the in our pre-call that I wanted to say again is I was just so impressed listening to a number of the women that you've had on your podcast. One thing I would say, my observation, and maybe this is different, and not that I know it, but there's far more men in this space than women, and um, I would not have had the confidence, I think, to do everything that we've just talked about when I was in my 30s and even 40s, particularly when my kids were young. And a number of your women have said, "Oh, and then I had a baby, or I had two babies while I was doing this." Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I just loved that. I feel like it's a great opportunity. I think that there are lots of the women should not think, okay, well, this is a man's world, and I wouldn't do it. I feel like if they could kind of take the demystifying out of it and feel like, okay, this is something I could do. Both women and maybe later career people, if
Hmm.
they're interested. I don't think you need to feel like it's a young man's game.
Hmm.
Um, Although I say this a couple of months into it, but that'd be the only thing I'd add to what we've already
Oh,
said.
I'm so glad you remembered to bring that up. I wanted to ask you about that. Such a good point. And just a quick plug: we're going to be doing kind of a panel of women searchers here in the next. We haven't recorded it yet, but for the listeners interested in that, stay tuned. In a month or so, it'll air. But and just on that point, and did you find? I mean, after 35 years as in the world of law, I'm sure you've bumped up against kind of testosterone driven business dynamics a lot. So you were
Yeah,
probably you probably used to that. But
yeah.
is there anything that you want to comment on about the search and being a woman in it, other than you just said? Like, do you think that it informed the process at all, being or was different for you than for others?
No,
No. Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, I think I didn't feel like I wasn't welcome, or I didn't that I people weren't taking me seriously. Like, none of the maybe that's another part about being older.
Yeah.
Like, I think that um, in my younger days, maybe people were like, "Who is she?" Um, but I didn't find it sort of male dominated in a bad way, that it's all about testosterone. I just noticed that it's been a long time since I've been the only woman on a deal, or the only woman in one of our sellers was a woman, and that was really great. But
Hmm.
other than that, it was pretty, but nothing, I'm not saying that at all in a negative way. It's just who seems to gravitate to this field
Yeah.
seems, in Canada anyway, to be mostly
Yeah,
men.
for sure. And here as well, for sure. And what a pleasure this has been. Congratulations on AES. And I'm really inspired by people who reinvent themselves or take themselves on new adventures when they don't have to, or when they already have so much success. So I think you'll inspire all of us, men and women alike. What's the best way to reach out to you if people have questions, or if Canadian listeners want any, some names maybe, or some lender names, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn, and also you can reach me at my AES work address, which is Anne with an E at agencyemployment.ca.
Agency employee, sorry, and at
Agent,
agencyemployment.ca.
yes.
Got it. Great.
Yes.
All will be in the show notes anyhow. And thank you so much. This is great. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Will. It was a great conversation. I love being on your podcast. Thank you.